Be prepared. That was the Boy Scouts' motto, a call to embody values like reliability, loyalty, helpfulness, kindness, and respect. Oddly, the Scout Code also seemed to imply naivety, stupidity, idiocy, and trust. Ethan couldn't make sense of it. Typically, when he checked his wife's iPhone email, he wouldn't dig further. She knew he respected privacy and never bothered with extra security. It was a habit he stuck to, one that, as a Boy Scout, felt ingrained in him. But with Grace leaving for Paris in a few weeks, Ethan struggled to remember the name of her hotel, even though she'd mentioned it several times. He tried to brush it off, not wanting another fight about his increasing inattention, a growing problem over the years. This separation, the longest since their wedding 5 years ago, felt like it could be the end. He briefly thought about sending her flowers while she was away, something romantic to show he cared. But deep down, he knew her affections weren't for him anymore. They were for Jordan, her companion on the trip. When Ethan unlocked her phone, using their wedding date as the password, he found himself reading a string of intimate emails between Grace and Jordan. They discussed romantic walks on the Champs-Élysées, moonlit boat rides on the Seine, and passionate nights. His heart dropped. Even more unsettling was that Grace and Jordan had been using their work emails for these exchanges. They should have known better. Like Ethan, Grace was a lawyer. Jordan was a paralegal at her firm. All three had years of experience in document review for major litigation cases, where teams sifted through thousands of emails for discovery. Ethan had always been trained to detect patterns and lies. Affairs weren't new to him. He often saw them play out in divorce cases. Lawyers would comb through emails to see how infidelity impacted a case. But this wasn't a case. This was his life, and it was falling apart. Ethan couldn't fully explain why, but when Grace first mentioned the trip, something felt wrong. After 5 years as a lawyer, listening to clients and reading between the lines, he knew when something didn't add up. Grace's casual mention of the trip was odd, especially since Paris had always been on their list of places to visit together. But now she was brushing it off as if it didn't matter. Then, reading Jordan's message from the night before, the truth hit him. Jordan had suggested removing Ethan from the picture so they could spend more time together. Grace replied that she felt safe with Ethan but admitted enjoying her secret moments with Jordan. The words stung like a slap to the face. Ethan wasn't sure what to do, but he knew he had to preserve evidence. His first instinct was to forward the emails to himself and print them out, just in case. As a lawyer, Ethan knew the importance of having solid proof before making any moves. Once the emails were secured, he began thinking through his next steps. He needed to stay calm and strategic. After all, this was his job, analyzing situations from every angle, calculating risks. Time was limited, though. Grace would be back soon, and he had to make decisions fast. But first, he needed to find her hotel. The flowers idea was off the table. He couldn't explain why he needed this information, but it felt important. Maybe it was to be near the Eiffel Tower or close to the International Chamber of Commerce, where Grace and Jordan would be working on their arbitration case. Once he found a suitable hotel, Ethan shifted his focus to Virginia divorce law. He remembered the basics from the bar exam, but needed to be sure about the specifics. Infidelity could be grounds for divorce, but it could also affect alimony, property division, and custody arrangements. There were always nuances. One defense that stuck in his mind was if Grace had discovered the infidelity but then resumed physical relations voluntarily. Ethan knew he had to act fast and leave the house, avoid confrontation for now. He couldn't afford to make any rash decisions. The whole thing felt like a legal case, and Ethan was determined to take control, even if it meant compromising his own principles. As Winston Churchill famously said, in wartime, truth must be protected by a bodyguard of lies. Ethan wasn't under oath, so the truth could be twisted if it meant protecting himself. With a plan in mind, Ethan began packing. He grabbed important documents, bank and credit card statements, 401k and IRA details, car titles, pay stubs, mortgage papers, and Grace's student loan balance. He packed quickly, methodically, before heading to the master bedroom. By the time he finished, his suitcases were packed and placed near the front door. As he came out of his office, he heard Grace in the kitchen. He decided to play the role of the tired, disheveled husband when she saw him. She looked the same as always, with her brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, but to him, she felt distant, cold. "I'll be going to Paris," he said, his smile tight, his voice devoid of warmth. Grace's face drained of color as Ethan's words sank in. "I'll be going to Paris," he announced, forcing a grim smile. Her blue eyes dimmed, the shock of his statement leaving her speechless for a moment. "What, Paris, Virginia?" she asked, trying to mask her concern, but the shock quickly faded. "Mark just called," Ethan explained. "We're needed for an insurance case. We lost the motion to compel, and the judge is furious. It's throwing the investigation into chaos." He gathered his things, moving quickly through the kitchen. "I'll be on the road for a few weeks, though I might drop by occasionally." "Poor thing," Grace said, her expression turning sympathetic. "Maybe your company's hiring," she added, her voice light. "I'd rather join you in Paris," Ethan countered, watching her face twitch with a flicker of concern before she smiled again. "Send me your resume," she joked, though Ethan knew her law firm was far more prestigious than his. She moved as if to hug him, but he stepped back, retreating into his office. The urge to strike her was almost overwhelming, but he fought it. He didn't trust himself. Back upstairs, Grace called after him. "What do you want for dinner?" "I won't be staying. I'll grab something on the way," Ethan said, rushing to the door. "Mark urgently needs me to hit the road." He grabbed his suitcases, heading outside. Grace followed him, a slight concern on her face. "When will you be back?" "Probably not until Friday. After Paris, we're heading to Roanoke, then Baltimore the following week." He felt a surge of paranoia as he watched her avert her gaze, as though already plotting how his absence could serve her own plans. He waved goodbye and reversed out of the driveway, hoping she'd assume he was just preoccupied with work, still fuming about the Saturday call. But deep down, he suspected she was already planning to invite Jordan over. Ethan drove to a nearby shopping center, stopping at a coffee shop. Like many lawyers, he found clarity when he could write things down. As he sipped his coffee, he made a list of tasks, but the thought hit him. Reconciliation wasn't an option. It had never been. Retribution was. The real question was how far he was willing to go. His phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He didn't recognize the number, but answered impatiently. "Yes?" "Mr. Carter, I'm Noah Harper," the voice on the other end said quickly. "I specialize in buying old houses and replacing them with mansions. I understand it's controversial, but people tend to soften when presented with a check. I found your number online." Ethan barely had time to react as Harper continued. "I'd like to buy your house and demolish it. I know a shopping center would make more sense, but with the county permits and construction timelines, it's a bit of a gamble. I can offer you a very favorable price if you and your wife are interested in selling." Ethan fought back a grin. This was the house Grace had picked out before their wedding, a charming, though aging, ranch that backed onto a wooded area with a creek. Despite its proximity to highways, it felt peaceful and secluded. It was exactly what Grace had wanted, especially the treehouse in the yard, which she dreamed would be perfect for kids. For Ethan, the house had been more about practicality. It was affordable, only a 20-minute drive to the subway, with a quick 30-minute train ride into work. "Mr. Harper, I'll be out of town for the next few days, so access to the property might not be guaranteed," Ethan said, his mind already working. "Call me Noah. I don't need an interior inspection. It's a wreck, and I've already seen the exterior. Can we meet Sunday morning?" Harper asked. "Sure. I'll likely finalize the deal using my wife's power of attorney since she'll be busy with work." "Not a problem," Harper replied. "I'll bring the paperwork." Ethan made a note of the meeting and began to picture how this deal might unfold. He couldn't help but smile at the idea of turning this situation to his advantage. Grace had no idea what was coming. She still thought she was in control, but Ethan's training in the Boy Scouts had taught him more than just survival skills. Stealth, cunning, and self-confidence, traits he'd learned to master, would serve him well now. She wouldn't see it coming. He finished his coffee, set the empty cup down, and walked back to his car. He needed privacy. After dialing a number, he waited as the phone rang. "Logan," he said when the call was answered. Logan Price had worked as a private detective during Ethan's years in corporate law. Ethan had always made time for pro bono work as well, helping disadvantaged people with legal issues. It was his way of living out his belief in justice and giving back. Logan, I need your help, Ethan continued. He briefed Logan on what he had discovered about Grace and Jordan, adding, Do you think she'll bring him to our bed tonight? Is she really that arrogant? She's become incredibly arrogant, Logan responded. She's a standout in her law school class. She believes she's untouchable. Ethan's eyes narrowed. I'll handle it myself, but I owe you for this. As he ended the call, he felt a cold resolve settle over him. He wasn't just a lawyer anymore. He was a man out for retribution. Grace would learn soon enough that her actions had consequences. The Lopez divorce case really brought me some good attention, Ethan said, his tone casual as he spoke to Logan. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Oh, and there's a treehouse in the backyard that you might find useful. It faces directly toward the master bedroom, and Grace keeps the curtains open. It used to bug me, but I've learned to accept whatever arouses her. You can access it by crossing the forest and jumping over the stream after dark. No fences or dogs around. There's a service road on the other side where you can park. Thank you, Logan said. If it's okay, I plan to set up a camera outside, facing the front of the house, to keep track of who's coming and going. Excellent, Ethan replied. And you're engaging Aaron for the divorce, right? You want to go ahead with it? Yes, Ethan confirmed. And yes. Got it. I know Aaron's thorough with affidavits and the whole reporting process. If you're right, we'll get the truth soon enough. Ethan ended the call, then dialed Aaron's number. This about the law school reunion? Aaron answered, his voice weary. I've already had 5 calls about contributing to their fund. No, I need your services, Ethan said, cutting to the chase. Grace has been unfaithful, and I want to pursue legal action. Aaron paused for a moment. Come by tomorrow. Even though it's Sunday, I've got paperwork to handle at the office. We might as well get started. It sounds like you've already decided you can't tolerate the infidelity. Logan's already gathered solid evidence, Ethan said. The real challenge will be negotiating a fair settlement. Grace is a lawyer at a top firm, so she'll fight back. And I'm sure her colleagues are already advising her. Leave it to me, Aaron said. I believe we can handle this in a civilized manner. So you're not planning to go all out against her? Aaron asked, sensing Ethan's calm but determined tone. Ethan paused, then said, Let's see what you propose. The next call required more finesse. Hello, Chloe, Ethan said when she answered. There was a long silence on the other end. Chloe, Ethan continued, it's good to hear from you. After all these years. Ethan? Her voice was skeptical. What's on your mind? I need your help, Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. I thought Grace was your assistant, after all these years. Chloe's laughter echoed through the phone. What's this about Grace? She's been up to no good, huh? What a shock. She sounded genuinely amused, though a little incredulous. It's true. I need your support, legal support. I can't offer emotional or carnal support right now. I'm seeing someone else, and I'm sure he's happy with the situation. I'm sorry, Ethan. I regret that our past indiscretions soured our friendship. I also regret letting Grace push you out of my life when we might have had a chance to reconcile. But now, I need you to help me. I need you on my side, Ethan said, his voice firm. Chloe was quiet for a moment before answering, her voice a little more serious. What do you need? He laid it all out for her. There was a pause, then Chloe's laughter rang out again. I'm in, she said, after she'd composed herself. You always knew how to make me laugh. Thank you, Ethan. Once everything settles down, you'll have to introduce me to Mr. Lucky, Chloe teased. I want to commend him on his excellent choice and invite you both to dinner. Consider it arranged, Ethan replied. He felt a brief surge of relief, but it was fleeting. There was still a long road ahead. After the call, Ethan booked a room at an extended stay hotel in Fairfax, far enough from his and Grace's usual hangouts to avoid raising suspicion. Once he checked in, he went out for dinner. Though his stomach wasn't particularly hungry, he knew he'd need to eat something to fuel himself for the drinks he was planning to down later. Across the street from the hotel, he spotted a place called El Mariachi. He walked in, and the hostess seated him at a booth. As he settled in, He noticed the bartender glance over at him, his face slightly familiar. Ethan brushed it off. Right now, he had bigger things to worry about than an unfamiliar face. The restaurant served what many would call Mexican food, though Ethan knew it was mostly an Americanized version. He ordered a cheap tequila, bracing himself for the hangover that was sure to follow. But when the waitress returned, she didn't bring the tequila he'd asked for. Instead, she set down a bottle of premium tequila, and as their eyes met, she nodded toward the bartender, who gave a subtle acknowledgement. Ethan returned the nod, and after the waitress left, he poured himself a generous glass. It took a moment before he remembered where he'd seen the bartender. He was one of the spectators at the Lopez divorce trial, the one who always sat in the back row. One day, after the trial, Ethan had asked Lopez's daughter, Maria, about the man. She had gone quiet, and then insisted he was just a family friend. Ethan didn't press further, but the memory resurfaced now. Ethan sipped his drink, jotting down a few notes, when the waitress cleared his table. He stood up to head to the restroom, feeling a slight sway in his step. The tequila was already hitting him. Leaning against the restroom wall, Ethan steadied himself and then returned to his booth. When he sat down, the bartender was there, smiling and holding out his hand. "Senor Ethan, good to see you," he said, shaking Ethan's hand vigorously. Ethan raised an eyebrow, settling into the booth. "I never properly thanked you for helping my cousin with that scoundrel she was married to." Ethan tried to downplay his role in it, but the bartender brushed him off. "He was severely injured in prison," the bartender continued, his tone casual. "Did you hear?" "I was," Ethan replied, trying to mask his unease. "They fear he may never walk again. Never eat solid food again either," the bartender said with a slight smile that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "Yesterday's news," he added, almost dismissively. Ethan glanced up, his mind spinning. "What brings you to El Mariachi on a Saturday night? Where's your lovely wife?" Ethan met the bartender's gaze, noting the knowing smile that never left his face. It wasn't mocking, but it was certainly deliberate. Ethan found himself momentarily stunned by the bartender's question. How did he know Ethan was married? Then it hit him. Grace had made a surprise appearance at one of the hearings, kissing him afterward. The bartender must have been there. "We're dealing with some issues regarding her," Ethan admitted, his voice steady. He saw no point in hiding the truth, not with the bartender's knowing smile. The bartender's grin widened. "I'm no lawyer, Don Nicholas, but I know this. If you want to keep a secret, don't write it down and leave it lying around." He gestured to Ethan's notebook, which detailed aspects of infidelity, sketches of Jordan's hypothetical demise, and even a list titled, "Burn the Bitch." Ethan shrugged. "Poor operational security, but at least I'm not exposing any sensitive customer data." The bartender leaned in slightly. "Any man in your predicament should ponder his desires. What do you truly want, Senor Ethan? Apart from wealth, what would be your ultimate vengeance?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I want to punch her nose so hard it shatters. I want to strike her face until both her eyes blacken. She has a stunning face, beautiful, expressive eyes. I want to obliterate them." The bartender chuckled and shook his head. "My friend, your thinking isn't rational. Those who seek revenge like that end up behind bars. You wouldn't want that. Unless, of course, it happens while you're visiting your clients." He paused, casting Ethan a sly look. Ethan nodded, the meaning clear. "Maybe I can assist you," the bartender continued. "You helped my cousin with her predicament. She could have asked me for help, but for various reasons, she didn't. Yet, you stepped in." Ethan tried to interject. "Yes, I had Logan gather evidence, but I let the police handle the real work." The bartender waved off his objections. "You helped people like my cousin. That's commendable. On behalf of my family, I owe you. I always repay my debts, and I believe you could use some assistance." Ethan studied him carefully. "I'm afraid I don't recall your name." The bartender's grin widened. "Some folks call me El Lobo, others call me Carlos Vega. To my friends, I'm Carlos." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What must I do to earn a favor from the devil? Trade my soul?" El Lobo's grin faded. "I don't deal in souls, Senor Ethan. Consider this a professional courtesy." Ethan smirked. "All right, So what's the plan? Just provide me with your address, your wife's name, and her daily routine. I have a few ideas, but ever heard the saying, ignorance is bliss? I think you need to stay blissfully unaware and keep track of your whereabouts over the next few months. Get a disposable phone so we can stay connected. Leave the number here at the bar, and after that, stay clear of this place. It's for the best. Ethan nodded, briefing El Lobo on hiring a private investigator, his plan to remain hidden until Grace left for Paris, and her travel schedule. El Lobo nodded along, but kept the details of Paris under wraps. One last question, Senor Ethan, El Lobo said. Is there any hope for reconciliation? Forgiveness? Mercy? Or should I not bother asking? Ethan met his gaze, a brief pause filling the space between them. Then, he exhaled slowly. I don't want to hear it. I've had a change of heart. El Lobo's expression turned grave. Understood. His demeanor shifted. Let's get you on the right path, then. The waitress arrived with the bill, and El Lobo waved her off, allowing Ethan to tip generously. He also handed Ethan a bottle of tequila, but cautioned him to pace himself. A clear mind is essential for what's coming. Somehow, Ethan woke up Sunday morning, surprisingly clear-headed and with a minimal hangover. He arrived at Aaron's office at 10 a.m., where Logan was already there. Apologies, Ethan, Logan said, his face serious. She definitely had relations with that guy in your bed. He was there 2 hours after you called me, and was still there when I left. We got high-quality footage. I made you a copy, but you probably won't want to watch it. Aaron interjected, You probably shouldn't. Ethan shrugged, accepting the DVD. Give me the summary, Logan continued. I climbed into that treehouse like you asked. They were all over each other. I got clear shots of their faces and their bodies. It was physical, though. They barely spoke to each other. I'm not sure if that changes anything. No. For how long? Ethan asked, his voice tight. They both have remarkable stamina, Logan replied. Ethan's jaw clenched. Thank you. This only makes me feel worse. Sorry, Logan muttered, glancing away. By the way, I'm personally acquainted with Grace from your party last year. I can identify her. We ran a check on this guy's license plates. They belong to Jordan Reed. Ethan exhaled slowly, processing the information. This was no longer just an affair. It was something deeper, darker, and the next steps would be critical. Logan's voice cut through the silence. I'm personally acquainted with Grace from your party last year, so I can identify her. We ran a check on this guy's license plates. They belong to Jordan Reed. We know he's colluding with her. The duration of their involvement is unclear, but it's compelling evidence. He paused, then added, We've also installed a camera in a tree nearby, overlooking the driveway and garage. You can monitor their comings and goings. I'll send you a secure link to the live stream. Ethan nodded, grateful. Thanks, Logan. What about the legal side? I've already discussed this with Aaron. We'll draft a report and affidavit for him to file. Again, apologies, man, Logan said, shaking hands with both Aaron and Ethan before heading out. Aaron, ever the professional, looked at Ethan. So, what's the plan? We're filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, but I don't want to serve her just yet, Ethan explained. I want to keep things under control. Aaron regarded him quietly for a moment. Trust me, Ethan. Those words make my stomach churn. I know, Aaron. I don't want any foolish moves. I think things will go smoother than you expect, Ethan reassured him. Aaron winced. Just file it Monday afternoon before the court office closes. Give me the case number, and I'll handle the rest. But remember, Ethan, I'm not versed in criminal law. Noted, Ethan replied, his tone light. And if things go south, you can't bail me out. Understood, Aaron said dryly, as Ethan headed out. Ethan's next stop was a productive meeting with Noah Harper, who informed him they could sell the house for $100,000 more than the mortgage, avoiding agent fees. Grace would be thrilled to know that, but Ethan kept the information to himself for now. He promised Noah he'd return soon with the necessary paperwork. Walking out of Noah's office, Ethan checked his phone. No calls, no messages. Grace was still with Jordan, it seemed. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan called his boss, Mark. I need 2 weeks of vacation, Ethan said, or I'll resign. Mark, recognizing Ethan's value to the firm, agreed without hesitation. With that out of the way, Ethan returned to his hotel and prepared for the next phase. By Monday evening, everything was in place. Grace had left voicemails on Sunday and Monday, but Ethan didn't respond, reserving his energy for Tuesday morning. Logan's camera feed had been invaluable. Jordan had stayed at the house on Monday night. Based on his schedule, he'd likely leave by 8 a.m. for work, just before Grace left around 8:30 a.m. At 7 a.m. sharp, Ethan strolled through the front door, his voice cheerful. "Darling, I'm home." A noise upstairs caught his attention, followed by Grace's disheveled appearance at the top of the stairs, looking startled. "Honey, what a surprise," she said, trying to mask her panic. "I thought you weren't coming until Friday. You didn't answer my calls." "Sorry, I was busy," Ethan said, as if it were nothing. He didn't acknowledge the 2 glasses of wine sitting on the coffee table, but he saw them. Grace lingered in the doorway, visibly torn between preventing him from heading upstairs and dealing with whatever was happening in the moment. Suddenly, a knock at the door interrupted the tension. "Could you get that, honey?" Ethan asked, already walking toward the dining room to arrange some papers on the table. Grace, still flustered, went to answer the door, expecting possibly a bailiff with divorce papers. Instead, to her surprise, it was Chloe, walking in unannounced and greeting them with a warm smile. Grace stared, confused. Chloe immediately took a seat at the dining table, opening her suitcase. Ethan stepped in, quickly smoothing over the situation. "Sorry, honey, I'm not sure when my next on-air appearance will be, but I thought it'd be good to update our powers of attorney, just in case we both end up traveling soon. You know, for financial and medical emergencies. I also got a tip about refinancing the mortgage at a great rate, so I thought now would be the perfect time to handle it." Grace's confusion deepened, but she forced a smile. "I'm just trying to keep things simple." Ethan turned to Chloe. "This is Chloe," he explained. "She's a notary. I wanted to make sure everything's in order before we leave town." Chloe grinned. "I'm your Boy Scout, always prepared." Ethan passed Grace the papers. "Just sign here. Feel free to review them, but I trust you to handle this." He motioned to the flags with arrows indicating where to sign. Grace, a little bewildered but still composed, smiled broadly. "I trust you, Ethan." She signed the papers quickly, passing them to Chloe to notarize. As Chloe did her work, she looked up. "Mrs. Carter, do you have a photo ID?" Grace stood up, heading to her purse, still a little off balance from the strange turn of events. A brief exchange of glances occurred between Chloe and Ethan as Grace retrieved her driver's license. Ethan silently prayed she'd comply, and as she handed over the ID, he could almost feel the weight of the moment shift. Chloe snapped a photo of the license with her phone, recording the details in her notary journal. Grace offered coffee, but both Ethan and Chloe politely declined, the tension thick in the air. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he considered the papers on the table. They were a game changer. As Chloe finished certifying the documents and recorded everything in her ledger, Ethan organized them into separate folders. Grace's eyes were on him, expectant, as she waited for his next move. Chloe, sensing the shift in tension, quickly tidied up her things and offered Ethan a subtle smile when Grace's attention wavered. Ethan seized the moment. "I've got a conference call," he said, heading toward the basement office. Grace, now with the room to herself, visibly relaxed. She had time to discreetly usher Jordan out and erase any trace of him before Ethan emerged from his sanctuary. Ethan descended to the basement, playing his part. He pretended not to hear the heavy footsteps as Jordan made his escape, or the garage door opening as he drove off. He kept the charade alive, until he heard the shower running upstairs. That was his cue. He gathered his things, slipped out through the basement door, and drove off into the quiet morning, leaving his wife behind. 2 hours later, after a hearty breakfast at the diner, Ethan sat across from Aaron in his office. Aaron raised an eyebrow as he reviewed the documents Ethan had handed him. "So, you're telling me you had your wife sign Form CC 1106, confirming the divorce filing and relinquishing future service of process and notice of any proceedings?" Aaron asked. "That's correct. The certified form is right here," Ethan confirmed. Aaron flipped through the papers. And you also coerced your wife into signing a property settlement agreement that transfers all proceeds from the sale of your home, along with any cars, jewelry, and personal belongings, to you? You're keeping your retirement accounts, she's keeping hers, and no alimony from you, despite her higher income? Ethan nodded. Indeed. She's always been generous like that. Aaron scrutinized him, then turned his focus back to the papers. And this affidavit you got her to sign? Where she confesses to infidelity and acknowledges that her lover was in your marital bed when she signed the document. Ethan's expression didn't change. The documents speak for themselves. Aaron studied Ethan for a moment longer, before spinning his chair around in exasperation. Damn it, Ethan. I'll take the case. But honestly, I thought this was above board. I had no idea you orchestrated all this. I thought everything was legitimate. Ethan didn't flinch. I'm glad you're on board, Aaron. But just so we're clear, if this goes to trial, will the notary affirm Grace's signature on these documents? Aaron leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. Yes, she will. Can she testify that Grace reviewed them carefully? Ethan's gaze was steady. Given Grace's legal expertise, I'm confident she did. I'm sure the notary will attest that Grace reviewed and signed each document. Aaron nodded slowly. As for Grace's comprehension, that's not something I'm going to comment on. Fair enough, Ethan said. Let's just keep it moving. All right then, Aaron said. I'll process everything today, including Logan's affidavit and report, complete with photos and a DVD. I'll make sure it's not visible in the public record, for now. We don't want this blowing up, do we? No, Ethan replied. Grace is leaving for Paris in just over 2 weeks. The longer we keep this under wraps, the better. Aaron's brow furrowed. Do you have connections in district court? Remember Seth? He was a year junior to us in law school. Yeah, Ethan said, struggling to find a firm, but now he's clerking in district court to pad his resume. He could expedite the process, but if the judge insists on live testimony, it could jeopardize everything. Aaron gave him a pointed look. Grace needs to decide not to contest this, or things could get messy. If she becomes aware of what's happening, it'll complicate everything. Ethan nodded. Understood. If it goes south, I might need to step away as your client. I'm aware of the risks. Aaron's lips twitched. Fair enough. You're playing a dangerous game, Ethan. But let's get this done. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan kept his distance from Grace. He sent texts at irregular intervals, citing his busy schedule, and only answered her calls sporadically. By week's end, Grace had stopped calling altogether. You've spooked her, Logan said over the phone. According to our surveillance footage, Jordan hasn't been at the house since your little surprise on Tuesday. He's probably meeting her elsewhere, either at his place or the office. But it's clear they're avoiding the house. Good, Ethan said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. There was a brief pause. The only change has been you quietly returning to the house to retrieve financial documents you needed. And don't forget, Noah's handling the sale of the house. Closing set for the week Grace leaves for France. Ethan had everything in motion. During the evenings, he frequented the gym, read books, and thought about the chaotic turn his life had taken at 30. It wasn't how he imagined things would be, but it was the reality he had to live with now. He checked in with Mark, informing him of his need for a few more weeks off. Mark reluctantly agreed, understanding the pressures Ethan was under and the temporary slowdown at the firm. As Grace's departure to France drew nearer, Ethan could feel the walls closing in. He had set the stage for his new life, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everything was about to change, and that things might spiral faster than he could control. On the Saturday, a week before Grace's Paris trip, Logan had some news. She's back to enjoying herself with him in the house. Ethan didn't respond with much concern, though internally, he'd rather burn the sheets than sell them when he eventually abandoned the house. By then, he'd already seen the video Logan had provided, revealing Jordan's allure. The man was a few years younger, a regular at the gym, with a penchant for mirror rituals before weight training. Otherwise, Jordan was unremarkable, embodying a superficial ideal Ethan could have done without. Finally, Grace embarked on her long-awaited Paris trip. Logan had one of his associates shadow her to the airport, ensuring she was safely en route before Ethan made his next move. With the house now temporarily vacant, Ethan entered, gathered Grace's clothes in the living room, and began packing. The following day, movers boxed her belongings and sent them to storage, while Ethan's possessions were moved into the apartment he had secured. Thanks to Noah Harper's help, a professional house liquidator, Ethan easily sold the furniture. Once the house was emptied, Ethan took a final stroll through the space, the memories now distant, before executing his ultimate task. He gathered their wedding photographs, the album, and Grace's wedding dress, placing them in the patio fire pit beneath the treehouse. With the flick of a match, he watched as the memories turned to ashes. Each photo added to the pit represented a moment in time that now felt like a lifetime ago. The video footage captured every detail of the destruction. The next day, Ethan finalized the sale of their family home using Grace's power of attorney. He had made sure she reviewed the paperwork, though her negligence was now his gain. With a separate financial power of attorney, Ethan gained access to the proceeds from the sale, along with their joint accounts, which he closed 3 days later. During Grace's first week in France, a construction crew demolished the house, quickly clearing the debris and preparing the site for development. Unfortunately, the tree, a childhood favorite, had to be removed, replaced by a new gazebo. The site's transformation into an empty square of land was halted abruptly, however, as issues with the permitting process arose. Ethan, relying on his connections, was confident these issues would be resolved once Grace returned. Throughout this time, Ethan ignored all attempts at communication from Grace. He avoided her calls, texts, emails, and voicemails, and deflected outreach from her friends and family, telling them he was busy traveling. He didn't want any of them showing up at the house and discovering the changes. 2 days before Grace was scheduled to return from Paris, Ethan received an unexpected call from El Lobo. "Ethan, you need to take a vacation. Go somewhere crowded, where people know you and can vouch for your presence." Ethan, intrigued but not entirely shocked by El Lobo's cryptic advice, realized it had been far too long since he'd visited his old college friends in New York. Fortunately, his schedule was open for the next few days, so he immediately booked a trip. In New York, Ethan visited several exhibitions and museums, socializing over lunches, coffees, and dinners with different groups of friends, covering most of his expenses on his credit card. At his hotel, he tipped generously to ensure recognition from the staff. He also mailed a DVD copy of the video he had taken of burning Grace's wedding dress and album to her parents' house. Late on Sunday evening, while enjoying coffee and pastries in Little Italy, Ethan's phone rang. It was his father-in-law. "Ethan, where are you?" "Grace is in a frenzy. She's in the hospital?" Ethan's interest peaked. "What happened?" His father-in-law explained. She and her colleague were apparently abducted when they returned from Paris. They just emerged this morning, both under the influence of medication. Her colleague, well, he's in pretty bad shape. But Grace, when she woke up, she was covered in tattoos, horrible inscriptions all over her body. Ethan's stomach turned, but he remained composed. "What happened after that?" he asked. "After she woke up and saw what had been done to her." A masked man entered and hit her, broke her nose, gave her 2 black eyes. Ethan, almost detached, reflected on the perfect closure this could be. Grace's betrayal, her infidelity. It seemed fitting for her to be met with such a fate. He almost felt nothing. "That's unfortunate," he said, keeping his tone flat. "I'm out of town right now. What do you need me to do?" His father-in-law's voice faltered. "You're her husband. She needs you." Ethan's voice hardened. "Not anymore. We divorced." The line went silent for a moment. Then his father-in-law sighed, the weight of the situation settling in. I'll let you know if we need anything else." As the call ended, Ethan stood outside his car, his thoughts swirling. The divorce was final, the property was sold, and the house was gone. Grace had left with nothing. And now, as she was returning from Paris, the consequences of her actions seemed to have caught up with her in a way Ethan could never have anticipated. The court finalized everything last week, and Ethan was already moving forward. "She's cheating on me with the man she's traveling with," he told his father-in-law, the words colder than he intended. "What? How? Here?" The voice on the other end wavered, struggling to process the news. Ethan didn't care. He knew he was being excessively cruel now, but he couldn't stop. I have a video. I can send you a copy of her engaging in bed acts, not with me, if you'd like to know. Silence followed, a long, strained pause. Ethan wondered if his father-in-law had suffered a heart attack on the other end of the line. We're done with her, Ethan continued, so you'll have to bring her home. She's not my responsibility now. You did it, his father-in-law finally exclaimed. I've been in New York since Wednesday. Celebrating my divorce, Ethan replied flatly, uninterested in a response. I understand you're upset, he added, trying to soften the blow, though his words lacked any true empathy. I hope Grace recovers soon, but I don't think we have anything else to say to each other. With that, he ended the call. As the phone clicked off, Ethan realized just how overwhelming the urban stress had become. He stared at the phone, now an unwelcome tether to the mess he'd created. He opened his email and sent Mark a blunt message. Go to hell, and so can the firm. A quick online search led him to an REI store in Soho, where he outfitted himself with new hiking and camping gear. Since Grace had never cared for hiking, this felt like an opportunity for Ethan to reconnect with his intelligence background. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was the growing sense that he needed to distance himself from everything. But the Adirondack Mountains seemed like a perfect refuge. He checked into a hotel in the city, paying a reasonable fee to store his luggage, then ventured off into nature, needing silence and solitude. His passport was ready in case he wanted to cross the border into Canada. But for the next 8 weeks, he mostly ignored his phone. The initial barrage of messages, ranging from frantic screams to tears, made it clear that someone had hijacked his ex-wife's phone. Her parents, her friends, her colleagues, all desperately trying to reach him. Unable to sift through the chaos, Ethan deleted the majority of them, listening only to a few before moving on. The messages were bizarre, out of control. Clearly, Grace's account had been compromised. Finding time to read through it all felt impossible. Ethan decided that, for now, the troubled woman on the other end of the line would have to sort out her own mess. He hoped she sought the help she clearly needed. 8 weeks later, back in civilization, Ethan met with Logan and Aaron for drinks at a quiet bar. Aaron, always the professional, got straight to the point. Just to clarify, he began once they were settled. I terminated our attorney-client relationship right after I gave you the divorce decree. I sent you the notice via registered mail. Haven't checked your email? Ethan admitted he hadn't, too consumed by his personal retreat to keep track of the details. It's quite a storm, buddy, Aaron remarked, stirring his drink. Logan's right. More like a typhoon. Logan leaned back in his chair, grinning. Plenty of havoc. Aaron finished his bourbon and ordered another. You should have seen the scene, he began. Monday morning, the former Mrs. Carter shows up at her old place with her parents. We never got around to removing the external cameras. She had a full breakdown when she saw the empty lot, dropped to her knees and started crying, then curled up into the fetal position. By late afternoon, she was kicking and screaming like a toddler at a mall. Logan took over. Later, a work crew showed up to clear some things, and she had another outburst. She was covered in bruises, those raccoon eyes from the slappings, and had a Band-Aid on her broken nose. You should have heard her. Aaron took a deep breath and continued. That afternoon, she and a couple of lawyers from her firm barged into my office. No appointment. They were yelling about motions, bar complaints, contempt. I had my Glock on the desk just in case, though. Thank goodness for Virginia laws. They sat and yelled at me for a while, but I didn't take them seriously. Not until I noticed the tattoos. All over her face. Bright red and blue. Ethan smirked, intrigued despite himself. Once they calmed down, I asked what the exact issue was. Why the aggression? They hesitated, exchanged looks. So I brought up the infidelity. I asked if they knew about her affair. They confirmed it. Aaron paused for effect. Then I showed them the video. The one you'd made. The one where she's in your bed with someone else. Clearly, they hadn't seen everything yet. The look on their faces, priceless. Then what happened? Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued. Well, Aaron continued, Grace starts screaming that you didn't even give her a chance to explain. So I told her you weren't concerned with explanations. You took action. Then she regained her composure and argued that she never consented to you selling the house. She was upset about the wedding dress, photos, and albums, claiming they were personal. I showed her the powers of attorney, one specifically granting you the right to sell the house, the property settlement agreement, and the fact that you were authorized to dispose of her personal belongings. I asked if she disputed her signature on the documents. She admitted it was hers, but insisted she hadn't agreed to the contents. I prompted her to consider what would happen if she challenged this in court. She fell silent after that. Ethan's lips curled into a cold smile. What else? Erin's eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and exhaustion. Then I reminded her of the affidavit she signed, acknowledging her lover's presence in the house. I asked if that was accurate. Grace lost it. She started screaming again and collapsed. Her attorneys tried to revive her, but by then, I'd already called emergency services. She refused to go to the hospital, though. Instead, she started ranting about tattoos and her boyfriend getting assaulted. It was a mess. Ethan leaned back, considering everything. Sounds like a hell of a day. Well, it's not over yet, Erin added, shaking his head. But as far as I know, none of this has anything to do with you, Ethan. You were out of town the whole time. Ethan let out a low chuckle. I'm glad I wasn't around to deal with it. I suggested that maybe Jordan had provoked a husband, Erin continued, either from another woman he was involved with, or someone who thought Grace was taking him away. I told them they could address any potential criminal case with the Fairfax Police Department. Then things took an interesting turn. They kept pushing for a motion for reconsideration, or something similar. That's when I told them that earlier that morning, I'd received an anonymous email. It contained links to several videos of Grace and Jordan, in your bed, before their trip to Paris. The message threatened to distribute those videos to everyone Grace knew, saying that you, Ethan, were unaware and powerless to stop it. They claimed to be allies, citing past assistance from you, and they promised to shield you. But they warned that if Grace didn't drop the matter, the videos would be sent out that very day. Ethan listened carefully, but his expression didn't change. Are you aware of this? Erin asked. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I was out of town, he replied simply. Afterward, they left. I haven't heard from them since, and there were no incidents at the courthouse. Erin finished his bourbon and set the glass down with a small sigh of relief. Logan picked up the story. They likely contacted the police because a couple of detectives showed up. They asked for copies of the videos and filed a report, but their interest fizzled out pretty quickly. Neither Grace nor Jordan could give any details. They only remember getting into a taxi at the airport and then waking up in the hospital. Grace later discovered herself in some dive hotel room, assaulted, and seeking medical attention. The room charges, including room service and minibar expenses, were all billed to her credit card. Ethan didn't respond immediately, but the thought of the mess Grace had gotten herself into gave him a strange satisfaction. I heard from the hotel manager, he said. New York police investigated my stay, talked to some of my friends there, but they all confirmed my whereabouts. I was in the city the entire time. Erin, always in the know, added. Word on the street is that your ex is holed up in her parents' basement, getting laser tattoo removal. The problem is, they charge by the square inch, and she's covered head to toe. It's gonna cost her tens of thousands, and even then, the ink will leave marks that'll linger forever. That's regrettable, Ethan remarked, deadpan. Erin fixed Ethan with a knowing look. Logan, unable to contain his amusement, pressed his lips together, stifling a laugh. What about your paramour? Erin asked, leaning back in his chair. He took quite a beating, didn't he? Yeah, Ethan replied. He's in for extensive physical therapy, multiple concussions. He's going to have a hard time landing another gig, probably. Their firm cut ties with both of them. Seems their relationship soured during the trip, Logan said, his tone turning more serious. And it ended up affecting the whole arbitration. They were unprepared, documents short, objections unready, witnesses problematic. They lost on the merits, and their client wasn't pleased. The firm had to make some cuts to salvage future business. Ethan's lips twitched at the idea of the fallout continuing to ripple through their lives. One of these days, Ethan, you'll have to tell me how you handled all this, Logan added with a laugh. Handle what? Ethan asked, playing dumb. I'm as innocent as a Boy Scout. Chloe waited in the car as Ethan walked out of the building. Her voice was sharp when he approached. I'm a bit peeved, she said, adjusting her sunglasses. No one bothered to ask if I actually notarized the documents, or whether Grace had even read them before signing. I was prepared to testify that I witnessed her scrutinizing every single page, but how could I know how much time she spent on it? Ethan smirked, turning to her as he slid into the driver's seat. Let's hash this out over dinner, then, he suggested. I owe you and your boyfriend for helping me regain my freedom, Chloe added. Ethan froze, glancing over at her. There's no guy, you dummy, she said, before he could even respond. Now zip it and drive me home, so you can commence the rather lengthy and grueling process of making amends. Sure thing, Ethan said with a grin. But first, I need to swing by the post office. For what? Chloe asked, frowning slightly. Sending a card to an old friend, Ethan replied. Reaching into the glove compartment and pulling out an envelope, he slid it across to her. It bore the Boy Scouts emblem. Chloe raised an eyebrow. You've got to be kidding me. I'll ask her if she feels safe now, Ethan said, his tone almost too casual, as he started the car. Safe? Chloe echoed, her confusion clear. Ethan didn't respond, just drove on, already halfway out of the mess, or so he thought.